Hello my dear friends, you're in the military with summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 11th of January of 2026. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the situation on the ground. Let's discuss the situation in the Zaporozhye direction, where the Russians intensify their offensive operation from three directions. The Russians are trying to improve their positions on the western Zaporozhye direction, and during the previous 24 hours, according to different sources, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to finish the battle for the settlement of Primorska. So this is the village, and according to different sources, the Russians by the end of the 11th of January of 2026 managed to establish complete control over the territory. So most likely tomorrow, either the Minister of Defense will confirm this information, or we will receive additional changes on the ground provided by different mappers. But as of now, this is probably already not the most important update, because it seems that the Russians are not going to move further in the northern direction due to some problem barriers like the river of Konsk and so on, and very strong positions of the armed forces of Ukraine to the south of the city of Zaporozhye. More likely the Russians will continue offensive operation further in the eastern direction with the purpose to establish complete control over the gap. And today we received lots of very important videos from the territory of the settlement by the name of Kamyshovaha. So let's discuss in details this video. This video was published by pro-Russian sources, and here we can see how Russians were attacking with FPV drones, vehicles, positions, drones, and many other different types of equipment of the armed forces of Ukraine exactly in this area. So this is a very important video, because this video shows that the main focus of the Russian offensive operation is moving further in the eastern direction. So as you can see, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything from this area. For example, if we increase the numbers of updates since the beginning of January, we see that we received lots of updates from the western part of this area, but during the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates exactly from this area, which means that the focus shifts further in the eastern direction. And currently, the main clashes are taking place for the settlements of Magdalinovka, Zapasnaya, Novobaykovskaya, and Novoyakovlivka. So, and due to the fact that now the Russians are tasked to establish complete control over these villages, the Ukrainians are trying to send as many as possible reinforcements and reserves, and the only way to do this is through this road that goes from the settlement of Kamyshovaha in the southern direction. So that is why we can see that Russians established complete FPV drone control over the only and the main logistic road, and now everything that enters this territory can be destroyed by Russians within seconds. I'm not sure whether the Russians are going to move further in the northern direction when they finish the battle for this territory, because as you can see, there is a very powerful stronghold. There is a dense network of the fortifications completely surrounded with anti-tank trenches, with anti-tank ditches. So most likely Russians will not go in these directions surrounded by rivers and settlements. Most likely the Russians will stop exactly in this area, and from these positions the Russians will begin their major offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Yurivka and in the direction of the city of Orekhiv itself. And according to the current pace of the Russian offensive operation, we believe that the battle for the city of Orekhiv, at least for its western and the northwestern flanks, will start somewhere within a month and a half, or within 2 months, somewhere around the early spring military campaign or the late winter military campaign. At the same time, during the previous 24 hours, we received a very important update from the central Zaporozhye direction. This is the territory around the city of Orekhiv. Today, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation stated that the Russians of the group of forces Dnipro managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Bilagoria. So this is the situation in this area by the end of the 10th of January of 2026, and this is the end of the 11th of January. The Russians improved their positions in this area, and different mappers clarified the situation. So based on the report of the Minister of Defense and based on the report that was published by the neutral mapper, we have adjusted the territory in this area. Furthermore, the same neutral mapper provided some updates regarding the situation in the area of the village of Mala Takmachka. So we, as you can see, we have added additional gray zone in the central part of the territory. So we see that the Russians intensified their offensive operation in these areas as well. And we believe that the main task of this offensive is just to distract attention of the armed forces of Ukraine and to force Ukrainians to keep additional forces, reinforcements and reserves exactly in this area, with the purpose not to allow the Russians to take under complete control this dense network of the fortifications, which according to this picture seems to be completely untakeable, that the Russians, if they attack these strongholds from the south, they will never be able to get any results. So that is why we believe that the Russians are going just to distract Ukraine's attention, while the main attack is going to take place from the eastern direction, from the city of Gulay-Polye. When talking about the Gulay-Polye sector of the Zaporozhye front line, we have changes. So this is the situation, for example, by the end of the 8th of January. This is the end of the 9th of January. If you remember, the Russians state that they managed to improve their positions in the area of the village Zelene. By the end of the 10th of January, we received the report that Russians managed to encircle the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine on the territory of Svetopetrivka. And by the end of the 11th of January, different mappers clarified the situation in the area between the villages of Priluki and the southern part of this front line in the area of the settlement of Dorozhnyanka. So now we can say it's obviously the Russians are attacking the settlement of Staroukrainka. Most likely now the focus lays exactly in this area. The Russians decided to outflank the settlement of Zaliznychne and to avoid the direct clashes for the territory. So the Russians are not going to attack the settlement of Zaliznychne from the east. It seems that Russians are planning to attack the settlement of Staroukrainka because the village is much smaller. And then if Russians are able to take under control the settlement of Staroukrainka, they will try to attack the Zaliznychne, the settlement of Zaliznychne from the north and from the northwest, trying to outflank the main defense layer. So this is the situation. We are waiting that in coming days we're gonna get additional changes on the ground. Most likely the Russians will be able to break through Ukrainian defense, and then after the fall of the settlements of Zaliznychne and Staroukrainivka, the battle for the main defense layer of the city of Orekhiv and of the entire Zaporozhye direction will begin. Russians will continue advancing through this dense network of the fortifications because this dense network of the fortifications was designed to repel attacks from the southern direction, not from the eastern one. So that is why the Russians most likely will face less barriers during this possible offensive operation. As you can see, all roads are moving to the city of Orekhiv, and with the end of the battle for the city of Orekhiv, we believe that by the same time Russians will be able to improve their position significantly in the area of the settlement of Ternovata in the northern part of the river of Gaichur, and Russians will continue offensive operation further in the western direction, this time towards the city of Zaporozhye itself. Everything that we've just discussed most likely will take from 5 till 9 months of 2026. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Pokrovsk direction. During the previous 24 hours, we haven't received almost anything. Just FPV drone attacks, just some crews of FPV drone operators and reinforcements of the armed forces of Ukraine arriving to this territory, and a very heavy attack from the Russian side. The most important update is coming from the original Dobropolye direction. During the previous 24 hours, as you can see, the map was adjusted. So this is the situation by the end of the 10th of January. This is the situation by the end of the 11th of January. The Russians, according to information we have, according to neutral mappers, managed to improve their positions around the settlement of Novoshachova. Basically, the Russians maintained the line in front of the city of Dobropolye. And another important update is that Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the stronghold that is located to the southwest of the settlement of Taretskaya. So these are the changes on the ground between the dates. The Russians, after very heavy clashes, established control over the territory, and now this stronghold opens the way for Russians further in the northeastern direction, basically in the direction of the city by the name of Drushkovka. We believe that this is going to be the main road of Russia's offensive operation during the upcoming months. We're talking about the Drushkovka offensive operation. The city of Kostiantynivka is a very powerful stronghold that Russians will not be able to take under control when attacking in front of the city city, the Russians need to maneuver, the Russians need to outflank the city. This is the only way how to take this stronghold under complete control. And to do this, of course, the best way to do this is to attack from the settlements of Sofiivka, Troitska, Rusin Yars through these fields, with the purpose to shorten the distances and to get and to stay as close as possible to the N20 highway that connects the city of Kostiantynivka with the city of Kramatorsk. So this is the only way, I believe, how Russians can minimize probable losses and minimize their activities and to finish the battle for this territory. So that is why Ukrainians are paying significant attention to this territory, because most likely they have resources, reserves, and forces to hold this line for as long as possible. We will see additional redeployment of reinforcements and reserves in this direction, just with one purpose: to keep this, let's say, part of N20 highway secured and saved against Russian FPV drone attacks or artillery strikes. Because if Ukraine lose control over this highway, the city of Kostiantynivka will not be able to stay under the pressure of the armed force of the Russian Federation for a very long period of time. This is, as you can see, the only way how to supply the city. For example, when talking about the city of Pokrovsk, and this is the reason why the Russians were fighting for the city for so long. First of all, it's a very big agglomeration, the city of Pokrovsk, Mirnograd, and another important thing that during the battle for the city, the Ukrainians almost always had possibilities to supply their contingent using three roads. The first one was going in the northern direction through the city of Rodinska, the second one through the city or the village of Grishna, and the third one in the western direction towards the city of Pavlograd. We are talking about M30 highway. So Ukrainians had at least three roads, three main supply lines that were supporting the Mirnograd-Pokrovsk agglomeration. But as for the city of Kostiantynivka, there is just one road, this N20 road, which is obviously the weakest point of the cities of Kostiantynivka defense. If Russians are capable to shorten the distances to the road from the north, east, and from the southwest, then Ukrainians will have minimal chances to save control over the settlement. But as of now, the Russians are still too far to tighten the noose enough around the supply line, which means that Ukrainians obviously still have 1, 2, or even 3 months of very heavy clashes for the territory. But at the same time, I would like to remind you that during the previous days, we received a lot of reports that Russians managed to improve their position significantly around the settlements of Vyrolyubovka, around the settlements of Bezymyanne, Klinovo. Some of these villages, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation and according to a group of forces south, were captured by Russians, which means that the distance to the main supply artery is already less than 5 kilometers. But at the same time, based, let's say, on this distance, we haven't received anything when talking about complete control, FPV control over the territory from the Russian side that can confirm, because it seems that maybe the Ukrainians managed to restore control over the territory. So let's wait and see. Obviously, we will understand everything. As of now, the Russians are completely concentrated on the southwestern part of the Kostiantynivka agglomeration. We're talking about the territory around the Kliban-Bytska water reserve. During the previous 24 hours, lots of mappers adjusted their maps, showing significant progress on the ground. Furthermore, pro-neutral mappers confirmed that Russians were able to answer the village of Ilinka and Berestok from its southwestern parts. So it seems that the front line in this area crumbling, but the main defense line still holds. We are talking about these territories, the villages of Mykolopolya, Raskoshne, Dovga Balk, and Stepanovka. So basically, the defense of the city of Kostiantynivka completely relies on these 4 villages. It doesn't matter whether the Russians manage to enter the southwestern part and the western parts of the city of Kostiantynivka. The most important is these 4 villages, because these 4 villages, first of all, protect the main N20 artery. If Ukraine loses these, if the Ukrainians are losing these lose these 4 villages, only then Russians will be able to shorten the distances to the N20 highway and to establish almost complete control over the Ukrainian logistic in this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the Slavyansk direction. During the previous 24 hours, the main updates were coming from the Liman direction and from the Izum direction. As for the city of Liman, it seems that Russians began their major offensive operation. Today, several pro-Russian sources stated that as a result of offensive operation, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to answer the city of Liman from its southeastern part. You know that this is a very important signal, because if you remember the 2022, then you know that the Russians attacked the city of Liman using the same roads. So first the Russians answered the southeastern part of the city, then Russians answered the northern part of the city, and then Ukrainians began withdrawing their positions towards the city of Slavyansk. So the defense of the city of Liman can collapse much faster than anyone can expect if we are talking about the same tactics and the same scenario that we used to see in 2022. So the Russians answered the city. As of now, we don't have video proofs, but we are waiting that these proofs would be published. And this is a very important stronghold, because if Russians establish control over the city of Liman, then the Russians will start redeploying their positions, their headquarters, their FPV drone operators crews very close to the city of Slavyansk itself, and from these positions Russians will be able to reach any part of the city of Slavyansk, because it's already something achievable with the FPV drones, fiber optics FPV drones of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Another important thing is that the Russians began their major offensive operation through the Svetogorsk forest in the direction of the city of Izum. The Russians are moving here under complete protection of this Svetogorsk forest, so which means that Russians suffer less losses and damages if Ukraine uses FPV drone operators. And the Russians are advancing, and during the previous 5 days, huge changes on the ground were recorded. As we discussed in the previous video, everything started somewhere between the 5th and the 7th of January, when pro-Ukrainian sources began publishing updates that first groups of the sabotage and reconnaissance forces of the armed forces of the Russian Federation entered the village of Lazova and began spreading letters suggesting civilians to leave this area, because the Russians were planning to begin their major offensive operation, and the Russians began this offensive operation. As you can see, we have huge changes. This is a very important area, because first of all, the Russians anyway will be forced to start any offensive in direction, because this is the most northern part of the Donetsk region. So as you know, the Russians are trying to force Ukrainians to leave this territory. This is the first thing. The second thing, this is also a very important foothold for the Barova direction, which is basically the central Kupiansk direction. If Ukraine loses this foothold, this triangle of villages like Lazovo, Rubtsy, Vovchi Yar, then Ukrainians in the area of Barova will lose significant portion of supply that is coming from the mainland, and this can allow the Russians to intensify their activities in the Boguslavka-Barova direction. As of now, there are very heavy clashes, but these clashes are mainly go along the line of combat contact. So we are keeping an eye on this area, because it seems that in coming days we are going to get more and more updates from this territory. And once again, the highest point in this area is the city of Izum, with its let's say elevation Gora Kamenets, so here. And if Russians take under control this territory, this part of the city of Izum, then they will be able to see huge territories around the city and to establish complete control over everything that goes in the direction of the city of Slavyansk. And from the area of the city of Izum, Russians will be able, with their FPV drones, control even the city of Barvenkovo, the main railway logistic line. The Russians will be able to control fields to the west of the city of Slavyansk. From the area of Izum, the Russians will be able to control to the west significant territories and the forests to the west, and the Russians will be able to establish complete control over the territories to the north. So this huge circle will be under complete control with FPV drones, with different types of drones of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, if Russians once again enter the city of Izum. This is a very huge territory, as you can see. This is the highest point in the entire area. Now let's move further As for the Kupiansk direction, the most important updates are coming this time from the Kupiansk-Uzlovoy agglomeration. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians published a video from the southwestern parts of the settlement of Podolo. Here we can see a Russian soldier that raised the Russian flag. Based on this video, we have adjusted the map, so these are the changes on the ground. We see that the Russians improved their position significantly. We still believe that there is a pocket that still remains under complete control of the armored forces of Ukraine. We're talking about the pockets between the villages of Petropavlovka, Kucherovka, the Zaskolie micro-district of the city of Kupiansk. These strongholds and trenches most likely remain under control of the armored forces of Ukraine, but I believe that you understand the configuration of this front line tell us, first of all, that the additional progress on the ground from the Russian side is inevitable. It seems that it's clear to everybody, because it's very difficult, I believe, to hold positions like this. It seems that this is already an encirclement. There is a forest which most likely allowed the Ukrainians to stay protected from FPV drones, but it seems that this is not a solution. Anyway, the clashes in this area continue, but as for the previous 24 hours, the main activity took place to the south of the city of Kupiansk-Uzlovoy. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians were attacking this territory. It seems that the Russians, after the end of the battle for the southern part of Podolo and Kurilovka, decided to cut this pocket. We're talking about the territory between Kurilovka and Kolesnikovka. So we're talking about these trenches, these strongholds, the villages of and the city of Kivsharovka, Novoosinovo. So it's the southeastern part of the Kupiansk-Uzlovoy agglomeration. So this pocket is the next task of the armored forces of the Russian Federation, and here we'll see lots of clashes and battles over the next days and months or weeks. As for the Sumy direction, the sources reported that the Russians intensified their offensive operation, and several sources reported that the Russians approached the village of Khotyn, which is the beginning of the second defense layer in the area of the city of Sumy. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.